think you're talking about the latest incident. Last night's events really bring home to people how black people and white people are treated differently. A 17-year-old white boy with an automatic rifle walking down the street, he had just murdered 2 people. He walks past a group of police, goes home and goes to his bed. A black man stops his car with his kids in it to prevent a domestic violence situation, walks away from the police and ends up with 7 bullets in his back. And it's beyond obscene. I think whilst we wish it wasn't happening, I think the fact that it is in people's, it's on their phones, it's on their TVs, it's on their computers, they are seeing that this is actually happening. It's not something that a few black people have spoken about and feel an injustice about. This is real. And it's important now for me, one of the things that we have done over the lockdown period is ask a number of the young black people who have been involved in our services over the years to share their experiences of growing up in Scotland. And we left it as open as that, asking them to share it. And as much as they share many of the positives, I think the overriding theme that came through for me was racism as banter. With how upset that they were that their friends or white friends just thought it was a joke when they made a comment about the Jackson 5, when a group of kids, one of our young people and their brothers were getting on a school bus, and how offensive that is and how demeaning it is. And what we as an organisation want to do is continue to play our part in raising awareness of people's experiences, but given that 40% of our participants identify as black minority ethnic, is give them that platform to say how they feel and to take this campaign forward. Where are we in Scotland currently in terms of Black Lives Matters movement? How organised is it? Is it a growing movement? What are the plans for the future?
Okay, I've been to Black Lives Matter demonstrations in Dundee, Dunfermline, Edinburgh, and of course Glasgow. And we are a national movement now. With a number of local chapters. We've made a deliberate effort to help coordinate the demonstration organisers across Scotland, and we've done that. We now call Black Lives Matter Scotland. We've been published with our own set of principles and values, which are derived and developed from the American movements, but with a specific Scottish context. Because, say for example, the big demand in America is around defunding the police, right? And for obvious reasons, because the police force there is not the same as what we understand a police service here, which is community element to that, and that doesn't exist in America. What you've got in America is militarized policing, yes. As an occupation army, as an occupation force. Thank goodness that in Scotland we don't have that, but in parts of England and some communities down south, they do have that. That negative relationship with the police, and that needs to change. Now, we're fortunate in Scotland. We're probably closer to a more community-led human rights approach to policing. We haven't got it perfect because we've got some problems. There's no doubt that we have a problem with police attitudes to young black people, because that's what they tell us. But at least they don't have guns, at least they're not shooting dead people, and at least they're not kneeling on their necks. That doesn't mean it's not impossible to happen in Scotland, because the attitudes are there in the mindsets. So it's that needs to be tackled, and so we need to make sure that the police is community accountable. So we're not calling for defunding the police in Black Lives Matter Scotland. What we're arguing for is community controlled and accountable policing, and I think that's relevant to our demands. But we certainly support the demands elsewhere that money should instead going into guns and big water cannons and trucks, and riot shields should go into youth and community projects, community reoffending and community justice programs to help youth develop strategies, mechanisms and skills and experiences that are positive. That's a far better way to spend our money than to spend it on police violent action. So we've got a movement. We're Black Lives Matter Scotland. We're quite easy to find, and we're trying to develop local chapters and groups one of the things I suppose it does is that most of the people who've been on the demonstrations have been white people, right? And it's important that the allies that we've developed from that process are willing to stand up and no longer stay silent when they see racism, and obviously when they know that their black friends and colleagues are experiencing it, they will amplify their voices and support them. So we're encouraging what they call allyship, to make sure that you're good anti-racist allies. To be an ally requires not just yourself to be not racist. That is a given, that's the admission price of being a human being.
Mm-hmm.
What we're expecting from you is to be active anti-racist, and that means challenging institutions. If you walk into a building in the west of Scotland, especially a public building,
mm-hmm.
and there are no non-white faces in there, then something has gone wrong. There should be, and you should question when you go into a room why there aren't.
Absolutely.
If it's just as you would if there were no women there.
Mm-hmm.
If you wouldn't go into a public building in a public organisation and expect no women to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So you should not expect black people to be there. Ask the question why they're not there. Ask for changes to be made. Demand that they're made. Support that your black colleagues are asking those things to happen. For young people, I think it's really important that in this day and age with COVID, obviously the big thing is going to be employment and how you get access to these things. So measures have to be taken to allow our young people to come into those spaces and to get employment opportunities, study opportunities. These are things that we're going to have to just tackle and deal with, especially for councils and public bodies, and the demands that Black Lives Matter raises on these questions are really important. So I'm very optimistic that we're going to achieve some positive changes, because undoubtedly the public has had their awareness raised by post George Floyd moment, and it's also a really important moment of black political arrival amongst this current generation, and that's important because prior to this I don't think we really had an African, Caribbean or BAME sort of black consciousness and politics represented out there, and that's important now. If we're going to talk about anti-racism and developing Scotland the way it is, that voice now is there. It's showing itself on the streets, it's showing its ability to mobilise people, and we're very proud of that in Black Lives Matter Scotland, but it needs to keep going. We have the Sheku Bayou public inquiry coming later in the year, and it's really important that the family, unlike 5 years ago, who were left pretty much on their own to deal with this policing question and the legal question, the failure to properly deal with his death, they were left to deal with that on their own. And this time, when the public inquiry comes, we expect thousands to be at the court in Edinburgh, so we'll be mobilising to get people to support that family physically and materially, to help them get their legal costs, because they don't get funding from legal aid, whereas the police people involved in the killing will, the Police Scotland will, the Lord Advocate will be there, the government will be there, everybody will be represented by public funded lawyers. The family won't be. So it's really important that we in Black Lives Matter support them. So that's a really important thing that's coming up. And I think if that inquiry will probably tell us something we already know, that institutionalised racism plays a role in how people get disadvantaged. It plays a role in the end in black people being either physically injured or dying. For that to change, the mindsets have to change, and the education and training of police officers and indeed all public bodies, whether it's courts, other institutions, whatever they are, they need to change too in order to make sure that we're in those spaces.
That point you make about educating the institutions. A question for me in the Scottish context: does Black Lives Matter movement have a specific place in terms of educating new police officers? Should it form part of the training that they do at Tullyallen in terms of not just anti-racist work, but looking again at the past and the current situation and the policing role in that?
I'm not sure if we have a role in the police thing, but there's no doubt that in Tullyallen, for example, I've been there and I'm aware that their officers, they have a human rights-based curriculum and approach to training, and in the physical training methods, they absolutely specifically say that you shouldn't kneel on or sit upon somebody to asphyxiate them. That's specifically ruled out, and yet, despite that training, this happened in Kirkcaldy, obviously they don't train officers to do that in the States either.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that somebody has broken the laws, broken the rules of engagement, broken the procedures, what happens? Well, if I did that in my other job, in any job that I have, if I did that as a counsellor, I would get removed from office. I mean, most other people, if they did something that was counter to their training and procedures, they would get fired. In this case, if somebody dies at your workplace as a result of your action, you would be arrested.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing, it's whether the law equally applies to the people applying the law. And that's what the demand we have. I think in Scotland we're possibly closer to doing that. If the inquiry gives us some results, it will probably give us some findings. And I hope that when the Bayou family get their justice, which is that the people who took their family member's life away pay for it in some way, or at least are exposed as being wrongdoers, because that's the thing. That's a crime. We all know it's a crime. He shouldn't be dead. Mm-hmm. He didn't commit a crime. He shouldn't be dead. Mm-hmm. Even if he had committed a crime, he shouldn't be dead. And that's why we all felt his death very, very, very personally, viscerally. The last time I felt like that was with Stephen Lawrence. I actually lived in South London during those days, and I'd actually used the same bus stop that he was murdered at many times. So we all felt that very personally, and that was why there was a big upsurge in interest around the Malcolm X film, and then the Black Panthers. I was a member of the Panthers in London in those days. My generation really responded very personally to that, and I don't doubt it's the same for young white people now with the current circumstances.
In the London context, obviously, in terms of the Windrush generation, there's been families coming into the UK since the 50s from generally the Caribbean. In the Scottish context, my perception is different. Many of the young black people in Scotland now are the children of people who've come directly from Africa, asylum seeking and the likes. I wonder whether there's maybe a difference in attitude or experiences, or maybe the young people whose families have come directly from Africa, who have sought asylum here. Is there maybe still a fear in young people about getting involved in things like Black Lives because they are sort of first or maybe just second generation to this country and don't want to rock the boat despite their experiences? What's your understanding?
Well, I think my understanding is parallel to the experience I had in the 70s. My family, I was second generation. Yeah. My family has obviously arrived in the 50s and 60s, and I grew up in the 70s and 80s. So we always had this conflict between blending in and fitting in and becoming British or Scottish or whatever, and trying to keep our house, the culture of our family, and often the experience of trying to obey your family's constrictions about what's the right way to behave versus what happens out there and how you deal with the racism out there. Often our parents, my generation anyway, certainly our parents failed to understand what we were going through. Mm-hmm. They didn't really believe that we couldn't get jobs because white people were racist to us to stop us getting jobs, because they all had jobs. They all came to Britain, suddenly walked into jobs. Yeah. They did experience racism, sure. They experienced a lot of it. They dealt with it, in their interesting ways sometimes. But they weren't stopped from getting employment, whereas we were. We were a whole generation of people who just couldn't get work, even at a time of full employment. And our parents often didn't believe that we were trying hard enough, or that we should just ignore them. So there was a tension between generations about how they perceived the racism problem. I think that's true now. It's difficult. Obviously, most of the black people who live in Scotland are African. 95% of them. Right? So I'm one of the minority that's Caribbean. So obviously, most people have a living memory. Either they gone to school in Africa and then come to Scotland, and their parents are still Africans. They may be in Scotland, but they're Africans who live in Scotland. So of course many of these communities exist with community organisations, with churches and mosques and everything. So they've got sort of a religious faith community background, which is a solid cultural background to come from. And it's, there's no doubt, people are very clear, I'm African and I'm proud and I know who I am. It's different for Caribbean people because we have to search for our Africanness. We have to
Yeah.
come to it politically by having a black consciousness. So in a way, many Africans I've experienced is that they don't really relate to the black label or to the labels of BAME or colour-based identification, because they don't see themselves that way.
Yeah.
Obviously, when you're growing up in Africa, you don't have to think of yourself, oh, am I black or am I not? Because everybody's black.
Yeah, of course.
So it's not something you ever have to think about until you come here. And that's so on one level you want to reject being defined that way, but on the other hand you have to acknowledge that because you've been defined that way by others, you are receiving negative and disadvantaging treatment. So it's that tricky thing. Well, what do you do? Do you challenge these institutions you're coming up against, or do you try to ingratiate yourself with people? And, it's a difficult ask we're asking young people to do, to straddle two cultures, to deal with the institutions of your own family and your local community of whether you're from Uganda or Nigeria or Kenya or wherever country you're from. And then you're having to navigate the Scottish cultural institutions. It's a difficult thing to ask our young people to do.
Yeah.
So, and I think that dual identity, you should be proud of that dual identity, but recognise that you're dealing with two sets of institutions at the same time, and you need to have the tools to be equipped for that. So that's why you need the politics. You need the political understanding to deal with that. You need the emotional strength and the mental health well-being, quite frankly, to deal with that.
So how can organisations, youth work organisations such as Achieve More, assist in that and assist with the wider Black Lives Matters movement?
I think we have to teach all young people and all Scottish people respect for the cultural institutions that African young people come from. So respect for the fact that, because a community is not hard to reach. You know why? Because you know exactly where they are every Sunday and every Friday. And that culture of, we don't necessarily go to pubs or clubs, or maybe younger people do, but the older generation maybe doesn't. So the cultural background that the people come from, it's very secure, very extended family, all of those values are really important to African people in a way that perhaps is a bit different from the wider society. The idea of an 18-year-old leaving home and living on their own is not the norm in an African community. You're expected to still have that connection with your extended family in a way that perhaps we've forgotten about in the host Scottish community. I know there's exceptions to that, it's not true everywhere, but I think generally speaking that cultural difference is quite important, and also where you learn power and access to things. If you don't go to pubs and clubs every other week because it's against your religious beliefs, well then you're missing out on a lot of social connections that are made in business, culture, community organising, you miss out on. So you then don't have the system knowledge that you would normally have as a citizen, which would allow you to navigate all those systems. And I think many of our young people start with a lot of disadvantages. First of all, their parents don't know the stuff that they need to know. And then their parents don't have the connections and the networks, and so then they don't have the networks. The parents do have networks amongst the African community, and of course churches and so on, or anybody who's linked in that way. So it's trying to make sure that we have a broad introduction and a broad sort of sweep of connections and networks that allow us to navigate and get around the institutional racism barriers that we might face. So I think just being system knowledge, system aware, this is really important for all young people to understand, and to, even if you're a white person, to know, okay, this system works in this way. It's a not overt system sometimes, it's sometimes very overt, but to know that system's operating, to understand how it works and therefore to challenge it. It's sometimes intangible, sometimes it's very overt and obvious, but it's just understanding it and therefore tackling it. So anti-racism has to be about learning what those systems are about and doing what you can to counter them.
And as an organisation, as I said earlier, 40% or so of our participants identify as black, minority, ethnic. I feel we are in a very, very strong position to play a part in supporting Black Lives Matters and to support young people in terms of navigating those systems that you identify. We don't always get it right, but we are open to to change and to developing to make sure that we are not just a sport and physical activity organisation, but we are a youth work organisation which is supporting young people's mental and physical health, their emotional development and their access to employment or training or education and the likes. And we very much want young people to feel that we can play that part for them going forward. Going forward, what are your hopes for the short, medium and long term in relation to Black Lives Matter?
Well, in the short term, I hope to be putting a resolution. I hope by the time this goes out that a resolution has been passed at Glasgow City Council around the Black Lives Matter question that authorises the official policy of the council to be that we have a museum of slavery culture, we have a consultation going with the public around redefining the names of our squares and places, that we have an active programme of anti-discrimination within the workforce and in the labour market. So I'm hopeful that I will have passed this stuff in the September Council meeting, and that now in October we have successfully achieved that, and we've got a plan and a strategy to bring a consultation with the BAME communities and properly bringing them into the process of deciding how we challenge racism. So I hope that one of these things will happen. I also hope that we will have an environment where young people will feel confident, because I think the confidence to act is also really important. I think that's for all people. Having your self-confidence, your self-worth, your emotional and mental health strength to challenge things where you know that they're wrong, so that you have the authority and the power to do it. It starts with confidence. I really do think that that's such an important commodity that you provide in spades, because you give them the ability to say, to speak, to do, to organise, to act. And these are all crucial life skills. They're all massively important to the development of a person. So I'd like to see a much more confident younger generation able to challenge, able to stand for office indeed. I hope that in 2 years' time I'll have some more younger people. My colleague in Springburn is, in fact, she was 19 when she was elected, so she's proof that you can do this at a young age. I'd like to see more black people actually standing for election too, but also be in those leading positions in public authorities and in companies. I want to see their faces in offices when I'm walking into them.
Fantastic. Couldn't agree anymore. On a personal level, what's your hopes for the future?
Well, by the time this goes out, I'll have decided whether who I'm supporting to go for Parliament and stuff like that. So I'm hopeful that there'll be a number of BAME candidates in the running to be selected to run for the Hollywood elections next year. I'm hoping that there'll be some really good ones. So short term for me, I suppose I would like to see Flag Up Scotland, Jamaica, and the relationship between Scotland and Jamaica flourish and to be properly recognised next year. A lot of the things we were going to do this year around Glasgow's UNESCO Music City and linking Jamaica and Scotland, I hope that I might well be telling you by the time this has gone out whether who the new rector of Glasgow University is, and whether they are prepared to sort of support the reparative justice stuff that we're doing with Glasgow. I'd like to see other universities doing this. I would expect the beginnings of the decolonisation of the curriculum to get moving. So I think it's going to be an exciting year, and as we move into the COP21 next year, I'm expecting the question of environmental awareness and carbon reduction and the whole thing we're doing around physical fitness and making cycleways available and pedestrianising our squares, reducing the carbon footprint to zero. This will take on a real momentum of its own. So I hope that a lot of our young people will be really massively involved in all of that.
And so what will you be doing in your spare time then?
You're assuming I have spare time. I hope that I have got a bike again, so I have started to cycle again. By the full injury I've got, I'll need to keep doing it. But yeah, I've started to cycle again, and that's after 10 years break, so I'm going to be using some of these cycle lanes, I hope.
And credit to Glasgow City Council for the efforts that they've made to make cycle lanes and make them more accessible to more people in terms of encouraging people to get out there and get fit. as a charity that promotes physical fitness, then we support that fully.
Oh, cricket! I forgot about cricket. How could I have had a conversation about much about cricket? I hope by next year we'll have had the Springburn Committee Cricket Club set up. But I've been playing cricket with the Bangladeshi community the last couple of weeks, and that's gone really well. So I'm hoping that sometime during 2021 we formalise the club. We have people from all sorts of backgrounds, from Bengal, from Sri Lanka, from Australia, from West Indies, from West Africa, all playing cricket in Springburn on a regular basis during the summer. That's what I'm hoping for.
And that we have strong working links with Cricket Scotland, and we are keen and have over the last 4 or 5 years included cricket as one of the offerings for young people at our holiday camps, and that will continue. We've got 2 cricket coaches that come along to that. So yes, the next cricket superstar might come from Springburn, who knows?
I'm sure.
Anything's possible. Graham, I know how busy things are just now for you as an elected member, and on a personal level with your Black Lives Matters involvement, amongst many other things. That's why I want to say thanks. I really appreciate your time today. Even before the podcast, we had spoken with someone about the potential for supporting awards, recognising the Black African community in Scotland. So I really appreciate the time that you've given to the organisation, the time that you've given to the political agenda, and moving that forward for the benefit of so many people, in particular young people in Glasgow. And I look forward to being involved directly or indirectly in the future in terms of help to take Black Lives movement forward and to supporting cricket amongst many other things in Glasgow. So thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.